A little while ago, you and I went back to the glory days of BMW and had a look at a brochure full of lovely E36 coupes. But within that video, I alluded back to the late 1980s, the period where BMW became a real force and a status symbol in the United Kingdom. So today on TwinCam, let's tie up that loose end and spend a while swooning over 4 of the coolest cars ever made. This big A3 leaflet immediately shows us exactly how and why BMW built an instantly recognisable brand, because we have a clear styling identity with recognisable character and a tagline anyone, whether into cars or not, will surely remember. Sheer driving pleasure is such a masterful slogan because it's not vague. Sheer driving pleasure is a mission statement, one that at the time the company truly stuck by. That is everything. That is everything that BMW used to be in its pomp. If sheer driving pleasure was a mission statement, then a clear commitment to dynamism is a stratagem. May I just bring your attention down to the text though, because BMW does not build boring cars, and never will. Driving a BMW is something that gives active pleasure, a pleasure that opens up new dimensions. In 2023, it's really sad to read that, because I have zero doubt that for the past 10 years or so, they've been trading almost purely on history. While they still have some interesting and enthusiast-led cars, the majority of the SUVs, 1ers and 2ers are just an affront to the philosophy, image and direction that used to be so ingrained into the company and that built the company into the powerhouse that it became. But let's try not to spend this one dwelling on what's gone wrong. Let's instead bathe in the brilliance of these 4 cars. This brochure, leaflet, whatever you want to call it, dates from February 1987, and that was a changeover year for BMW, whose model range, while narrow by modern standards, presented cars that were almost 3 decades in the making, consisting of the E33 series, E28 5 series, E24 6 series, and finally the all-new E32 7 series. As I mentioned in the E36 video, the 1980s were so important to motoring in the United Kingdom because the company car market was supreme. Economic conditions and European integration meant that people could now afford more exotic and more expensive cars than ever before, and with societal changes that, for better or worse, caused people to flaunt success and wealth, people were moving away from Fords, Rovers and Vauxhalls and towards marques with a stronger, more consistent image that proved a sense of superiority. That's why BMWs and Mercedes-Benzes became so much more popular in this period, and this was the coalface of it, encouraging normal folk to maybe even downsize from a big Ford Granada to a BMW 3 Series. Usually for the sake of image, but that image is created by pedigree. Today, cars are an indispensable fact of our daily lives. They give us independence and mobility, and sometimes they can transform driving itself into genuine pleasure. True, we all derive satisfaction in our own different ways, and each of us makes our own very individual demands on a car. That's why, today, there's an almost unlimited variety to choose from. It includes large and small saloons, coupes and convertibles, slow and fast cars, the technically simple and technically sophisticated, the mundane and exotic. Most are more or less alike. Some are unique, and we all set our priorities and arrive at our own choice. On the other hand, some of us know from the very outset that there's really only one car for us, one that, unlike any other, reflects our own thinking. You might even say our whole attitude to life. This uncompromising position applies to the majority of BMW drivers, because they invariably expect more from a car than a simple means of transport from A to B. They want to be in complete command, to feel the performance and comfort, to live the functional perfection of the whole engineering entity. Even when everyday business motoring sometimes becomes tedious, the pleasure doesn't evaporate for most BMW drivers. They savour the car's handling, appreciate its exceptional reserves and state-of-the-art technology, and, above all, relish the thought of slipping smoothly into flowing traffic. They look forward with anticipation to the open roads, the winding stretches, the hill sections. And it makes no difference which BMW you choose as your personal means of enjoyment, because each and every BMW is an unequivocal acknowledgement of vitality and an active lifestyle. Now that's all image-based rubbish, but it's image-based rubbish that has been earned, an image-based rubbish that paints the BMW driver as noticeably different to those of any other, lesser motor car. So maybe curiously for a company as successful at marketing as BMW, we begin at the bottom of the range with the E30 generation of 3 Series. Now this was a compact executive car that was really much smaller than I think many of us remember. One of these is dwarfed by the likes of a Cavalier or a Montego, and I mentioned those because even a basic 316 was much more expensive than either. For many people, the E30 is the purest form of purebred BMW, and being introduced in 1982, I think that's fair to say. Not only was it the driver of that huge growth in the UK, but because for 1982, this shape was very conservative. It was a clear evolution from 1975's E21 3 Series, and as such, its straight-edged and full-grilled styling painted a real contrast to the streamlined family cars that were so common at the time. I'm thinking Astras, Cavaliers, Escorts and Sierras. In fact, the individuality is even noted in the copy. Every 3 Series shares the distinctive BMW face. Twin headlamps with ellipsoid low beam technology, the gently sloping bonnet, the chromed kidney-shaped logo in the centre of the grille. An unmistakable style, a look full of character. And alongside the visual character of these cars, they painted such a contrast to the growing efficiency-centred competition, which used either very simple rear-wheel drive systems or had switched to a less dynamically pure front-wheel drive. While the E30 suspension wasn't the most sophisticated, it was fully independent, coil-sprung, and its dynamics lent it to becoming one of history's most deified drivers' cars, completed by their engines. Of course, there's the entry-level 316 and 318i, which had recently gained fuel injection, and these engines were versions of the brand new M40, a simple overhead camshaft 8-valve 4-cylinder whose basis would remain under the bonnets of BMWs through to 2002. It wasn't an enormously characterful engine, but it provided the entry point, and its predecessor, the M10, was the engine that really started the modern era of BMW under the bonnet of the Neue Klasse and O2 series saloons in the 1960s. Naturally, however, the fun really starts with the requisite 6 cylinders, with the 320i and 325i. Both of which use the incredibly dependable M20, the unit known as BMW's Little Six. This is an engine that dated back 10 years to 1977, and just like the M10, rather helped define BMW as a deliverer of consistent and interesting cars. The 170 brake horsepower of the 325i means you have 20 brake horsepower more to play with than a Montego Turbo, in spite of the E30 being a smaller car. Now, the gearing means the acceleration is dulled off, but that makes one of these an outstandingly capable and stable high-speed cruiser. I think the image-based discussion peaks and ends here, because that headline and the ambience of this image tells us everything we need to know about BMW's target audience. But that's in spite of the fact that the E28 5 Series was a car that could trace its roots back 15 years to 1972 and the launch of the preceding E12 5 Series. The E28 was a heavy update of that car, launched in 1981, but if the E30's shape was conservative, then the E28's is just quite old. But that doesn't mean it's not a great looking car, because clearly it is. By 1987, it may have been proportionally and dimensionally out of date, and it would be replaced in 88. But as with the E30, it's a car still brimming with character. You can see the late 60s and early 70s-ness within the stance of the thing, but the elegance of the rear lamps, the vents in the C-pillar, and the iconic shark-nose front end give it such a sophistication. I'm going to ignore the salesmanship of the copywriting, but I would like to address this second paragraph. Thanks to the unmatched all-round visibility created by the classic stepped design of the rear, you always know that you're driving a car that's easy to handle even in the most congested city traffic. For me, that's the number one key feature that modern cars are missing, and jumping from my Metro, for example, into my E46, it's like being in a cave. The car is so unnecessarily difficult to manoeuvre because they forgot that you could really do with seeing where you're going. But hey, let's go on to the engines, because only the 520i uses the same engine as its 3 Series counterpart. The 518i uses the older M10 4-cylinder, I'd assume as they were about to discontinue the car, and the 525i as well as the 2.8 and 3.5 use BMW's Big Six, the M30, which itself dates back to 1968 and would even see service in the E28 replacement for a few years. And speaking of replacements, let's fast forward past the 6 Series to the all-new E32 7 Series. This car was brand new for 1987 and ushered in a completely new future for BMW. While a recognisable evolution, for BMW didn't do revolution in their glory days, this shape still defines even the most modern of BMWs in one way or another. We'll start small with the depth added to the side profile. The E30, as I said, was a very simple shape, and while the E32 has the same pinching and general shapes, it's been dragged out that bit further to add a dynamism sorely lacking from this car's predecessor, the E23 7 Series, which, dating back to 1977, was quite an ugly, slab-sided thing. I think the biggest general advance though is the neatening up of the area around the rear doors and the Hofmeister kink. On the E28 for example, the way the rear doors intersect with it is clumsy. The E32 on the other hand emphasises it as a stylistic feature, drawing attention to the shape rather than the shut lines. It would also be easy for us to forget that while the Hofmeister kink had been on BMWs for 20 odd years by this point, the E30 and later E36 Tourings didn't have one. It may have been a conscious choice in the 1960s, but it was only really in the 1990s that it became a genuine part of BMW's iconography. And along that strain, we have the kidney grills. On the E30 and E28, they were a part of the grille, but with their accentuation in the E32's profile, they become the real focus. On the 750i that we'll get into in a minute, the grille is wider still, setting the template for the dreadful kidneys we have today, but also the really tasteful faces we'd see up until the early 2000s. Finally, the E32 brought something new. The L-shaped rear lamps that we still see today. Again, not every BMW since has featured these, but they are, nonetheless, a constituent part of BMW's iconography. But if we turn to the engines, we see the same dependable M30s that we saw in the 5 Series. But as I mentioned earlier, these would be replaced within 5 years, because BMW was about to take a serious step up market. When we looked at that E36 Coupe brochure a little while ago, I introduced you all to the M50 straight 6, which replaced the M20 little 6 from the E30. But the old Big 6 engine was instead replaced by the quad camshaft M60 V8. Now, BMW had built V8s before, but not in decades, so I think this was driven by their aspirations in the American market. Because while a 6 is a fundamentally smoother engine, a V8 suited the American image of a big, high-end car. But don't fret, because alongside its 4s, 6s and 8s, 1987 brought us the pinnacle of BMW, the M70 5-litre V12 in the 750iL. The V12, when all is considered, is the best engine layout for a passenger car. With 12 cylinders, we're in balancing coins territory. In fact, you can absolutely balance a coin on an M70 engine and rev it without fear of losing it. But while a V12 is undoubtedly exotic, I think many of us forget just how rare they are. There were quite a few V12 engine passenger cars in the 1920s and 1930s, but they all essentially died following the Second World War. Ferrari first built a V12 in 1948, followed by Lamborghini in 1963, but neither of them can be considered luxury manufacturers. It was actually Jaguar who built the first modern saloon car with a 12-cylinder engine in 1972, and for the next 15 years the XJ12 was in a league of its own. And that meant that BMW were the first to rise to Jaguar's challenge by introducing the 750i. That was your choice for the ultimate in engine layout, Jaguar or BMW. And hopefully that illustrates how big of a deal this car was 37 years ago. It doesn't look its age. In fact, with these aero-style wheels, I think this is one of the sleekest, most handsome saloon cars ever built. In fact, I have this very image of this very brochure framed and hung on the wall, because that styling with that engine is the sum of every ideal. But let's now hop back in time to the outlier in the range, because while a 3 Series convertible was available in 1987, every other model was saloon only. So the E24 6 Series is quite special in itself. The 6 Series was also the oldest car in the BMW range by this point, having been launched in 1976. And as with the E28, you can see that age peeping through, but again, that's no bad thing, as this car's perfect proportions and really purposeful stance give it an aggressive edge that was lacking in any other big coupe. Certainly the equivalent Mercedes-Benz couldn't hold a candle to the sheer coolness of the 6 Series. But despite being 11 years old, BMW hadn't just sat on their hands. This car is very closely related to the E12 5 Series. So when the E28 was launched in 1981, the E24 gained a lot of its know-how. As a result, a late 6 Series is a rather different car to an early one. Sure, it still has the same big 6 engine, but it has a different displacement, a different fuel injection system, different gearing, a new design of McPherson strut at the front, and new trailing arms at the back. There's all new trim of course, but also a pretty heavy facelift and a new interior. Additionally, early E24s were manufactured by Karmann, but BMW brought the assembly in-house for the later cars. That particular point was a carryover from the E24's predecessor, the E9 range of coupes, one of which was the legendary 3-litre CSL. But while both old and current looked and felt like the saloons on which they were based, a symbol of that move upwards shown by the 750iL was that the 6 Series would be discontinued in 1989. Its indirect successor was the E31 8 Series, which was more of a super grand tourer than a standard coupe, complete with its wedgy silhouette, pop-up headlamps and 12-cylinder engines. But hey, that's a story for another day, so let's round off today's video with the most powerful letter in the world. This is where we have to return to the image and marketing though, because in its heyday, BMW Motorsport actually built racing cars. All 3 of these have genuine racing pedigree in them, and that's how BMW built M into such a powerful brand of its own. but then they started sticking the badges on fast versions of road cars, which was okay I suppose when they had motorsport built engines in them. But now the badge adorns 90% of 1 Series diesels. Lesson 1 in how to wreck your previously deified badge: meet the BMW M Sport trim level. But let's start with the M5 and M635 CSI, because these are closely related cars and they take the comfort and usability of standard cars, then fit them with genuine racing engines. From the outside, the M5 conveys the classic elegance of the BMW 5 Series. Only the small M5 badge reveals that it is both developed and hand-built by BMW Motorsport. Suspension, interior and the 286 brake horsepower have all been subjected to the minutest scrutiny, and it is only available on special order. It all adds up to a unique form of exclusivity, travelling discreetly under M power. The flair of the spectacular surrounds the BMW M635 CSI Coupe. The harmonious lines of this elegant coupe leave you in no doubt that it is a car with enormous potential. The race-proven 24-valve technology of the BMW M1 has been even further refined and developed for the M635 CSI, giving it even greater responsiveness with refined performance. The powerful straight-six engine is a perfect match for a car as dynamic as the M Coupe. 286 brake horsepower was unheard of in a saloon car of this size in 1986, and that engine, as mentioned in the text, was the M88 from the M1, itself designed to be a racing car first and foremost. In race spec with a turbocharger, one of these engines produced up to 1000 brake horsepower. But even in the M5 it had fuel injection, dual overhead camshafts and the individual throttle bodies. But of course, the M3 was the real racing car here. The latest product from Motorsport is the BMW M3. A purebred sports car which isn't a simple hybrid conversion into a Group A Tourer, but was conceived as such from the outset. First came the racing car, and then it was refined for the road. Its 2.3 litre 16-valve engine, its suspension, its body shell, its ABS braking system, you can spot the racing experience wherever you look. No other production car is as closely related to an out-and-out racing car, and no other car passes on those qualities to the driver as directly and impressively. It hadn't yet been realised here, but the E30 M3 would become the most successful racing car of any kind of all time. And as mentioned, it isn't a normal E30. Much like the Toyota GR Yaris today, the body shell is bespoke. The M3 is a different size to a normal E30, with all different body panels and even a different glass house. But rather than fit a straight six, less weight and better weight distribution lent itself to support the S14, which with its M goodies produced up to 235 brake horsepower in its final iteration. The succeeding M3s may have been better family cars or better long-distance cruisers, but none of them were true racing cars like the original was. And on that note, I think that'll do us nicely. BMW of the late 1980s were absolutely supreme. I don't think there's any questioning why enthusiasts so willingly and strongly latched onto the mark. And when something is held in such high regard and marketed with such fluency, it breeds desirability. While I think it's a shame what's happened to their philosophy, they're only so popular because of the brand created by cars like these. And on that note, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then please do click like and subscribe to TwinCam as well. I'm forever indebted to my wonderful Patreon supporters, so if you'd like to support me that way, then please do follow the link in the description and get access to this and many other brochures for your viewing pleasure, and I'll have more videos coming along soon.